Get started right into it, is Daf Chavav 26 in Mesechet Sanhedrin, in the third parak, Zeb Borer, which is, of course, has dealing with the way you choose and decide who's kosher and how you decide both. We said judges a bit initially, but now witnesses as well. Of course, you can't really choose a witness, but you can decide who's kosher for a witness. So we said in our Mishnah on Daf Chavav, well, the Mishnah was earlier, that one of the people who were apostle were people called Socharei Shvi'it, people who do business during Shemitah, which is prohibited, right? And what that means is that they everyone's supposed to leave their food in the field in Shemitah, and you're allowed to gather it up and eat it. It's possible, and I don't want to get into too much halachot Shemitah because it's a little beyond my scope, but it's possible that if you gather for yourself and you have a little bit extra, you can even sell a little bit extra. But selling a little bit extra from your house is not the same as doing business, right? Having a store and selling Shemitah products. So they prohibited people who are socharei shmiyat. Then our Mishnah said, and now I'm going to start reading from the fourth line. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said in the Mishnah, "B'tchila hayukarin otan osvei shviyat." They used to call them gatherers during Shemitah, and then when the Rabu Nasim, the people who forced them, we don't know what any of this means yet, they called them socharei. So says Mar Micah Amar, what in the world is he talking about? Amar Rav Yehuda Hachika Amar. B'tchila, originally hayu omrim osvei shviyat ksherim socharim psulim. Initially, they said, look, if you're just a gatherer, meaning instead of taking a meal for yourself, you take 10 meals or something, we don't have defined this yet, then that's okay. It's not ideal, but it's not, as long as you're getting rid of it and using it before the Zman HaBi'ur, which is the time that it's finished in the field, the fact that you collect a little bit extra and maybe even sell it is not a problem. It's only if you are socharim, if you are, a businessman, so you basically do a commerce in it. But then what people were doing, people would then provide money to poor people. So they would give, $50 to an ani and say, go to the field and gather as much as you can, and then basically band together 10 poor people and make a business out of it. So basically people are using this loophole of individual gathering to turn it into industrial gathering. And Asli Aniyim va'asfulo, the Aniyim would go and gather, Umaiti, they bring it, and this guy would then sell it. So then they chazru lomer, they said, psulin. They said, look, people are taking advantage of Shemitah, and anyone who gathers anything beyond what they need during Shemitah to sell is possible. Says the Gemara, that's an interesting pshat, but it doesn't really fit with the words of the Mishnah. Kashu ba b'nei Rechava, right? Also an interesting group of people, right? The b'nei Rechava, who were some Amoraim, had a problem with this because it says in the Mishnah, Mishirabu an nasim, when those who were pressuring them, forcing them, became many. It shouldn't say that. It's saying Mishirabu tagarim mibayle, those who are business people. Ella, in fact, it's the opposite. B'tchila yomrim, originally in old times, so to speak, they used to have a halacha that everyone who gathered to sell during Shemitah, echad zev psulin, whether you gathered a large amount or you gathered a small amount, whether you gathered your personal field or hundreds of fields, the fact that you're doing business during Shemitah makes you puzzle for testimony. But Mishirabu Nasim, now when the pressure came up, and what's the pressure? My ninhu, arnona, right, which is the word we use now in Israel for taxes. But when taxes came up, then there became a big problem. And this is a tremendously complicated Gemara because it has huge implications for today, which is that Rashi understands arnona not to mean tax alone, but there's a big debate about what arnona means. Let me start with that. But one explanation Rashi says is that the king or the governor would say, oh, look, you have a field, you have 5 acres, you have to produce 5 bushels of wheat for me every year. And there's no if, ands, ifs, and buts. If you don't work the field, you still got to produce 5 bushels of wheat. In which case, come Shemitah, you're in big trouble, right? Because unless you have wheat saved up, you're not going to have anything to pay. There's a whole nother shot in Arnona that other Rishonim have. The Rambam has this whole shot that it's referring to where they would have soldiers who would come, and conquer, and there was a responsibility on the local population to feed the soldiers. I know there's a word for this in Greek or Roman or something, but there was some responsibility to feed the soldiers, in which case, even during Shemitah, you got to feed them. So basically, there's an invaluable responsibility to feed them. So because of that, Kidemach is Rabbi Yanai, as Rabbi Yanai announced, and again, this is the very controversial statement of Rabbi Yanai, Puku v'zaro b'shviyat, go out and plant your fields during Shemitah, Mishum Arnona. You can basically forget about Shemitah. They got rid of Shemitah. People had to plant their fields to pay this tax. So there's a huge discussion about what do you mean? How can you get rid of Shemitah? Like, what do you, it's so Tosfos has a pshat that says basically it's pikuach nefesh, right? They were going to be killed. They would die. If they didn't provide the food, the king would kill them, take all their food. And if you have no food, you can plant during Shemitah. I mean, you don't have to die, which is
Or
fascinating.
they would confiscate the fields altogether,
Right, but it
which
has to be
means that going forward, they wouldn't have any way to actually sustain themselves.
right. So I mean, it's you could say that, but obviously every Shemitah involves some threat. You're losing your livelihood. But this was clearly another level, right? But that could be it. Others, Rashi here says that it's because Shemitah is only drabanan nowadays, so therefore they were much more mako to do it. But obviously, what that would mean today, if you had taxes, if you had bills, if you had like, how do you understand this? You could see why it's very complicated. But once they said that, Chazru Lomar Osfim Ksherim Suchrim Psulim, that's where they said, look, if you need to gather a little bit of your field during Shemitah because you have to pay taxes or because there's the bills coming, that's okay. But if you do a whole business in it, that's where you are wrong and you're a puzzle for Edut. Now, we're around 15 lines from the top. Rabbi Chia Bar Zarniki, Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, very fascinating story. Again, these stories are amazing and they're obviously all incomplete. We don't have any backstory. We don't know, a lot that went on. But this is a great, crazy story where Rabbi Yochanan, we'll see in a minute, sent these two great rabbis, Rabbi Chia Bar Zarniki and Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok. And he sent them Havikaazli la'aber shana ba'asya. He sent them to be ma'aber the year to talk about making it a leap year in Asya. Now, Asya, I don't know where Asya is, but it's outside of Eretz Yisrael, right? And we've learned earlier, Rabbi Yochanan, of course, lived in Eretz Yisrael in Tveria, right? We learned earlier that you're only allowed to do in Eretz Yisrael. So Tosfos is very up in arms about why they were leaving. Probably there was some gezerah, right? The Romans wouldn't let them get together. They couldn't gather. They would be arrested or thrown into jail. Or so they had to leave the country in order to at least have the deliberations about being Ibur Shana. So they're getting ready to go on this super secret mission. Of course, everyone hears about the secret mission. So Pagab Reish Lakish, who, as we all know, was a very close student and a colleague of Rabbi Yochanan, he bumped into them and he said, "Look, I want to come with you. I want to tag along. It's Bal Bahadayo. I want to come. Obviously, I'm not part of the group. I wasn't chosen. But Amar, he said to himself, or he said to them, Izo ichsi hechi avdi uvda. I want to go and see how it works. I want to see how the juice is made, as they say, right? So I want to understand what deliberations you have and how things go." Okay, so they went along. So they have this procession of these two big rabbis and Rish Lakish and whoever else, drove the camels. So Chazia, now on their way to Bavel, but on the way out, meaning they're still in Eretz Yisrael, they saw Lahu Gavra de Kakariv. They saw a man who was plowing in Shemitah. This year was Shemitah. So this seemed to be a very inappropriate thing. And Rish Lakish got hot under the collar. Amar Lahen, Rish Lakish said to these two rabbis, Kohen v'choresh, this must be a Kohen. We'll see why in a second. Kohanim are always suspect on Shemitah. And he's plowing during Shemitah. Amrullah, they said to him, well, let's not make a big deal. Yachal lomar agistinani betocho. It's possible that he's an agistin. Rashi says an agistin means he's renting it, right? So that he doesn't really own the land. He's renting the land. Maybe it's owned by a non-Jew. That's what Rashi says, one shot. Or maybe it's what we just said, that he has to pay this tax, and therefore he's forced to do it. We don't know why this guy's plowing. Don't give him a hard time. Maybe there's a good reason for it. So they let him be. So then they keep traveling to Chazia. They come again. They see Lahu Gavra Davi Kosach Bekarmi. They see a guy who's let me translate Kosach. He's like taking off branches. He's what do you call it? Pruning.
Pruning.
Thank you. Pruning in a kerem, which is prohibited if you're doing it for the purpose of the kerem growing, right? It's like plowing the land. If you want the trees to grow more, so you prune them, that's prohibited during Shemitah. Amar Lahen, so Rabbi Yishlakish said, wait a second, we got to stop and hit this guy on the head. Kohen v'zamir, he's a Kohen who's doing pruning. Amar Lei, so the rabbi said, well, maybe Yachol Lomer la'akel beit habad anitzarch. Maybe he just needs the wood, right? You're allowed to cut down wood for needs of like the beit habad is the press where they would surround it with wood, but you're only not allowed to cut things down for the purpose of growing. But you can cut things down if you need them, right? You're allowed to cut down wood for another purpose. So basically, they kept saying, "Stop being such a hard guy." And Reish Lakish said the words that are very famous nowadays. Amar lahem, halev yodea. The heart knows im la'akel. If he's doing it to la'akel literally means to fix the Beit Habad, like for the purpose that you just said, or im la'akalkel, or he's doing it to cheat, right? Meaning whether he's doing it the heart knows, and basically he's implying, you can be limud zchut on these people, but I have a very strong suspicion, says Rish Lakish, that he's up to no good. Anyways, says the Gemara, let me just ask the story. Which one happened first? Did they see the guy plowing first or the guy cutting down the trees first, right? Hi Amar lahem b'tchila. Which one happened first? Because if it goes in the order that we just said it, right, it doesn't make any sense. At first he said, oh, maybe they're working the field legitimately because they have to pay taxes or because they rented it. So then you could say the same answer for the vineyard, right? Maybe he's really working the vineyard to grow grapes, but he's got to do it because he's got to pay taxes, right? That's always an excuse apparently during Shemitah. So it must be Hanami Lemrlea, say the same answer, that the reason they're working the vineyard is because they need to pay taxes. Elaha Amar Liberation must be that first they said to them, the reason is that maybe he's using the wood for making his Beit Habad. But then when he saw him plowing, you obviously can't have an excuse for plowing. Why are you plowing? And his answer had to be because maybe he's got to work the field to pay taxes. V'hadar amar lai hach. Then he told him the other one. Now, ask the Gemara, why did he say he's a Kohen? Maishna Kohen. Why did he say this must be a Kohen? That's mishum de chashidi hashmiyat. Kohanim are very suspect that they don't follow the rules of Shemitah. And the stam reason is that Kohanim are privileged people. And they have a feeling that, the rules don't apply to us. We get to eat truma, we get to eat kachim, maybe we get to eat shemitah too. Maybe it's one of the other, holy things that goes to us. And we have a source for this from a Braita, it's a Tosefta actually, in Trumot, Tanya, as the Braita says, Sa'ah truma. Let's say you have a portion, right, a Sa'ah of truma, right, which is permitted only for a Kohen to eat. And it's nafla leme'ah sa'in shel shvi'it. It falls into 100 sa'ah of Shemitah, right? So the food of Shemitah, which you're allowed to eat on Shemitah, but once the Zman Bi'ur comes, you have to throw it away, right? There's all kinds of restrictions in Shemitah. Says the Braita ta'aleh. It disappears, basically, meaning it's batel. Remember, truma is batel 1 in 100. So basically, it's as if there's no truma, anyone can eat it, even in Yisrael, it doesn't have to be a Kohen. But if it's pachot mikan, if it's less than that, then you're really stuck. Then you're kavu. You're a kavu. You have to let it rot. Because remember, Shemitah, you can't sell Shemitah things. And you have to let it rot so that, once it rots, you're allowed to throw it away in Shemitah, but you can't just throw things away without them rotting. So it says in Gemara, 1 second, Avina, but we asked about that. Amay yirek fu. Why do you have to let it rot? Why don't you sell it to a Kohen, right? Yimkerenu lekohen b'dmei truma. Sell it to a Kohen. Now, of course, you can sell truma to a Kohen, which is not going to be a high market because the Kohen knows that you can't sell your truma to anybody else, right? So there's not a big market for it, but you can sell truma to a Kohen, meaning one Kohen or Yisrael can sell it if it's already been given to a Kohen. But you obviously can't sell the Shemitah part. So why don't you, let's say you drop 1 sa'ah of truma into 50 sa'ah of shemitah. So you don't have 1 to 100 to be batel. So why don't you sell the whole thing to a Kohen and say, chutz midmei oto sa'ah. You're going to leave out, sorry, you can't sell truma. Sorry, I said you can't sell shemitah. But say I'm selling it, chutz midmei otosa, you say to him, I'm selling it, and this is what I said earlier, you can sell small amounts of Shemitah, but you obviously can't sell the Truma. So take out the amount of Truma, which has to be a gift to the Kohen, and say, I'm selling you this bundle of grain. It's got 50 parts of Shemitah, which sells for whatever amount. It has 1 part of Truma, which I'm not charging you for, because I'm not allowed to. So why isn't that an issue? And said Rabbi Chia, Mishmei De'ula, the reason is because we don't want to give a Kohen any kind of business with Shemitah. Because nechshadu Kohanim HaShemitah. Because Kohanim are chashud HaShemitah, and therefore we're worried that they're not going to follow the rules properly, they're not going to eat it in the right time, they're not going to dispose of it properly, right? All the rules of Shemitah. And so, it seems very likely that Kohanim, as we see from here, are suspect on Shemitah, and that is why Rish Lakish assumed that these guys working in the fields during Shemitah were Kohanim. So either way, that's the story. So anyways, they arrive in Bavel, wherever this place is that they're going, in Asia, which sounds a lot like Asia, but I don't think that's what it means, right? They arrive in Asia. Maybe it is, but I don't know. And they arrive in Asia, and they say, where am I? Sorry, I lost my place. Because we're in the middle of nowhere. Amru, the rabbi said, Truda Hudain. This guy is a pain in the neck. right? Tarud means he's a tirda, he's a worry. This Reish Lakish, he's a big problem child. He's always finding issues with something. We don't really want him part of these discussions. So Kimatu Lahatam, when they got to this place Asya, and they go, remember we said earlier, they go to the Aliyah, they always went to the attic to do the discussions and have privacy and have, contemplation. So they went up to the attic and they pulled up the ladder so that Reish Lakish couldn't come up. They shut off the elevator. Saliku Igra, they went up to the attic. Shalfu Darga Mitute, they took out the ladder from underneath them, right? So that Reish Lakish couldn't come up. So Reish Lakish, of course, was very unhappy with this, meaning he traveled all the way with them. And when push came to shove, they didn't let him into the room because they said he's going to be a troublemaker and make a lot of problems. So
Going
that's
back to, sorry, going back to Asia, it's a town east of Tiberias.
okay. But Chutz La'aretz, apparently,
Yeah,
according
obviously. Chutz La'aretz, yeah.
to somewhere in what I guess is Syria or Jordan or somewhere, depending on the day, I guess. So they kicked Rish Lakish out of the deliberations. Rish Lakish, of course, did not like this. So when they got back, after the Kamei to Rabbi Yochanan, they came back to Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish came in and said, Rabbi Yochanan, I got complaints. Amar Lei, he said to Rabbi Yochanan, I don't get it. You send these rabbis, they don't even care about Shemitah. How could they be Ma'aber Shana? B'nai Adam, which is a very insulting thing, right? Not that people are all B'nai Adam, but these were Rabbanim, right? These B'nai Adam chashudim al Shviyat. They don't even care about Shemitah. They're letting all these people plant and cut down. They don't seem to stop anything. Ksherim la'aber shana. They're allowed to be ma'aber the shana. You're really letting them go and be in charge of these deliberations. Then Rish Lakish, who was not a very nice guy to argue with, Hadar Amar, he said, maybe it's not different. Remember, a week ago, we had a whole story, I think it was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks, but I think 1 week, about the Rabbanan talking about these farmers who were like, oh, if the rains haven't come, and remember, if you can't spit into the wind and the wind comes back to you and it's too cold, it's not going to be spring yet or something. So you see, they rely even on farmers who don't know what they're talking about. So these rabbis are just like farmers, they're not really relying on them. They're just taking the deliberations. Hadamar lo kashili midi dahavi shlosha rabbi bakar. These people are just these rabbis. This is very insulting, right? Are just like the three shepherds. They're not. No one really thinks that what they say matters. They're part of the deliberations. Rabbanan chushbanayo samach. The Rabbanan have their own calculation. This is just extra information. Hadar Amar, but then Rish Lakish kept getting himself burning. You could see he's like burning up here. He then said, "Lo dami hatam hadar imnu Rabbanan v'ibru lahu shata." There, the Rabbanan at least got together after they heard from the farmers about this, these signs for the spring, and they were ma'aber the year. Hacha kesher rishaimu. These rabbis who sat together, they're called a kesher rishaim. Those are very strong words, right? It's a kesher means like a knot, right? Of evil, a knot of Russia. So how can these rabbis don't care about Shemitah. They're part of the Ibor Shana. Rish Lakish, you can see, is ranting to Rabbi Yochanan about how awful the whole thing was. The Kesher Rishayim eno min minyan. So said Rabbi Yochanan, get the heck out of here. Da'aka. You're also a nudnik. I don't need you. So Rabbi Yochanan kicked Rish Lakish out for all his polemic. I'm sure he went to Twitter and continued it there. But said that was Rabbi Yochanan. Now, of course, the rabbis heard about this and they were very insulted. So they came to Rabbi Yochanan and said, "Why are you letting Rish Lakish say all kinds of stuff about us on blogs? Right? It's very insulting." So ki ata lekamed Rabbi Yochanan, Amrle, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, "Look, karile ro'ei bakar." He compared us. He said, "Oh, they're just like cattle herdsmen," and you didn't say anything. Then when he said we're Rishayim, then you kicked him out, right? You didn't say anything to them. Rabbi Yochanan said, people call each other names all the time. Who cares? That's one explanation. Amarlo, he said back to them, Chikarle ro'et son, my aminale. So what if they called you ro'et son, which most understand is worse than ro'et bakar, right? You're even cheaper. You're lower down on the food chain. You're shepherd of sheep, which is a very immature job. Little boys can do it, etc. Who cares what they call you? If they call you Rishayim, I get it. I stop them. But there's insults are common in this field. You got to get used to it. Now, says the Gemara, this terminology, Kesher Rishayim, is a very loaded terminology because we're going to see from Psukim in Tehillim that there's a whole discussion about this concept called Kesher Rishayim. So, who was it referring to? And now we have this great Agadata, which it's a phenomenal Agadata because it goes back to a time when obviously we have very little records of. But back in the time in Yemei Bayit Rishon, Chizkiyo, right, obviously was a great king, and Chizkiyo had a person, which we have in the pasuk. He talks about him named Shevna, who was, I think, I don't remember if it's Sar Tzava, but he's one of the leading generals in Chizkiyo's court. Okay, and we're going to see in the Gemara, at least according to our Gemara, Shivna was very, very much in competition with Chizkiyo for popularity. Of course, as you all know, as the Torah talks about, and we have other sources, Sanhedrin came and conquered the world and came to Yerushalayim or came to Israel during that time of Chizkiyo, and Chizkiyo had to deal with what to do about Sanhedrin. So says the Gemara now, let's give some Agadata. We're at the second middle wide lines. My Kesher Rishayim. Think about, there was a story, says the Gemara, Shivna, this guy Shivna, Havidarish Betleser Rabfata. He had 13,000 or 13 tens of thousands, so 130,000 students, which students means also like military, like an army, basically, of people who followed him. He had many followers. And in fact, Chizkiyo, who was the king, Havidarish Bechat he only had 111 10,000s, meaning 110,000 followers. So Shivna was more popular than Chizkiyo, not by a lot, by a little. So when Sanhedrin came and made a siege on Jerusalem, Shivna disagreed. Chizkiyo's plan was to, not let Sanhedrin come in. He gave him all the money, but he didn't allow him to come in. But Shivna said, I'm willing to go out and make a deal with Sanhedrin. Katav Shivna Pitka. So it was a siege, but he wrote a note on a piece of paper, and Shadda Begir, he threw it with an arrow over the wall to the to the camp of Sanhedrin, and it said, quote, Shevna v'siato ishlimo. Shevna and my group, my 130,000 people, we are shalem, meaning we're willing to make a deal with you, Sanhedrin, and we'll give up and we'll open the doors of Jerusalem and we'll let you come in and make peace under your terms. Chizkiyo v'siato lo ishlimo. It's Chizkiyo and his buddies who are holding us back. Shenemar, now this is based on a pasuk in Tehillim, where it says, Ki hinei rishaim yidruchun keshet. The wicked, which is referring to Shevna, they get ready with their arrow, konenu chitzim al yeter, right? Keshet, I guess, is a bow. They throw their arrows outside, right? On the yeter means the string. But anyways, they are sending messages by arrow. So Havi kamistapti Chizkiyo. Chizkiyo heard about this and he was very nervous because even though Chizkiyo followed Hashem, he was a very righteous king. But he said, you can be righteous, but sometimes you're wrong, right? Or, as the Gemara puts it, Dilma chas v'shalom netiyat date dekuchabricha bataruba. Maybe God will follow the rove. And if rove of the Jewish people want to give up and make a deal with Sanhedrin, maybe that's how God wants it to be. Kivan deruba mimsur inhu, mimsuri, inhu nami mimsuri. Maybe if the rove of the people really want this deal, God will approve it. So Ban Naviv Amarlo, and this is the pasuk that leads to this whole discussion. The pasuk comes in Yeshayo, and Yeshayo again was at the time of Chizkiyo, right? A lot of discussion between the two of them, at least in the Medrash, right? The Navi came and said, "Lo tomun kesher l'chol asher yomar ha'am hazeh kesher." It's not going to be a kesher, a group, a meeting, or a conspiracy, as people say, for all that the people want. Meaning, even though there is public agreement, klomar, it's kesher rishaimhu. The public only matters if what they're saying is righteous. If the public wants something evil and they're a kesher of rishaim, of bad people, kesher rishaim eino min haminyan, God doesn't count that, which is a fascinating. Everyone talks about this Gemara, right? Because it does imply that there are times where God will decide what to do for the people based on what the majority want to do, right? The only issue here is that Shevna he was a Russia, so he didn't count in the majority. But imagine that he wasn't a Russia, and you had two legitimate things that somehow, God is pulled by the majority. Again, this is obviously a discussion beyond our understanding. But anyways, that's the story. So it keeps going. Halach. Now, the Medrash continues. Where am I? Second to last wide line. Last word. Halach lachzov lekever kivrei Beit David. Shevna thought he was really great. He was really great. Everyone was following him. And he thought, one day when I die, I'll have a space too in the Kever Beit David, right? The king's tombs, which I don't think was the same place back then, but I'll have a place to rest among the greats as well. So while he was doing that, Ban Naviv Amarlo, and this is also a very interesting pasuk in Yeshayo, where Yeshayo says, Ma lechapo, what are you doing here? Right? Umi lechapo, who do you have here? Ki chatzafta lechapo kever, that you are digging for yourself a cave in this place. You have no business here. And this is a nevuah of Yeshayo, of God, for Shevna. Hinei Hashem mitaltelecha taltelei gever. God will make you taltel means to wander, to throw you around like the wanderings of a man. Says the Rav, what this means is that tiltula de gavra kashimi de itita. that the wanderings of a man are harder than a woman. That a woman, not that anyone likes to wander, but she can make a home or find a place. But a man is much more helpless, I guess, when he loses his connection to his original place. But continues the pasuk this pasuk in Yeshayo, the otcha ato, and you will be. We translate this as you're being shaken around and around. Amar Yossi Rabbi Chanina, what that means is in fact, that means that Shevna broke out into tzarad, which remember was, if you recall, many of the kings got tzarad, and it was a big deal. It says here in Yeshayahu Otcha Ato, and it says in the parsha of Tzarat in Tazria, right? That will be on the lip, but Yateh is the same verb of or noun actually of Atcha Ato. So continues the pasuk though in Shayo. This is all the same story of the nevuah that we say is happening to Shivna. Safof yitznafcha tznefa, right? You will be rolled around kadur al haaretz. Now, some understand kadur as a ball, as we understand. The problem with that, of course, is that it should then say kick kadur, like a ball. Tosa says it doesn't matter. Sometimes the chaf does both. It does the ki and the kadur. But others, Rashi understands that it means kadur. It's like a door, which Rashi understands. Where's Rashi? Rashi's kadur is like a shura, meaning like a row of something. So basically, you're being bound around by like a piece of string, basically. Rachavat yadayim. Tana, now what the Braita says is that what that means is who bikesh kolon beit adonav. He wanted to throw his master Chizkiyahu under the bus, right, by saying he won't cooperate with Sanhedrin, I will cooperate. Therefore, his own honor was switched. He was thrown around, and he had reverse of his fortunes. And what is that reverse of his fortunes? We're at the last line of Daf Chaf Vav Amud Aleph. When he went out, so what happened was Shevna said, "Okay, I'm willing to go out with my 140,000 followers to 130,000 followers to Sancheriv's army." So he went out the gates of Yerushalayim. But when he went out ahead of his army, when he went out of the gates, Ata Gavriel, the Malach Gavriel came, and he slammed the gate in front of all of his army. So basically, he's one person standing out there. So Amar Le, so Shevna now shows up, turn the page, Shevna shows up to the army and says, I have 130,000 people. And they look at him, they're like, you're one guy, right? Where's the rest of your people? Amar, he said, oh boy, it must be that they all actually were just big talkers and they actually didn't follow me. Amalei, they said to him, well, then you obviously lost all your credibility. And Cain, you are just laughing at us, you're making a joke out of this, you're mocking us. And they killed him basically by nikfu ba'kvav. They made holes. This is one of the gruesome ways that they used to kill people. They made holes in his heels. The talub is on base susim, and they attached him to the tails of horses, and they dragged him through the fields. And they dragged him through the fields to kill him, which obviously is a very brutal way to kill someone. So it ended up very poorly for Shivna. Amar Rebbe Lazar, it says more now about Rebbe Lazar, where are we? The fifth narrow line on top of Chavav Amabet. Shivna Bal Hana'ahaya. Shivna was a guy who really, he lived it up. He enjoyed good meat and wine, and he was, real, I don't know how you translate Bal Hana'ah in English, but he really wanted to live up the good life. And we know that because Ktiv Achad says in Yeshayahu, again, all in the same parsha, where we're talking about Shivna, it says, Lech ba sachin, go to the sochin, right? Now, sochin can mean a lot of different things. Sochin is often a vice president, right? It's like a sochin, is a representative. But Ktiv Hatam, it also can be, as we had earlier, that when David, of course, was old, it said, right, Tilo sochenet, he had a woman, Avishag came, and she was a sochenet, meaning she made him warm, is that we translate a companion, but that's also sexual favors, basically.
No, Ba'al Ana is a pleasure seeker.
Pleasure seeker, okay. I guess that's a literal translation, but there must be a word for someone who, really wants to have a good time. Anyways, Vomer says, and this is a pasuk of in Tehillim, but it's about this, we darshan, it's about Chizkiyahu and Shevna. It says, Ki hashatot yaharesun. When the shatot, which we usually translate as the foundations, the pillars are broken down, tzaddik ma'pa'al. What can a tzaddik accomplish at that time? Says Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina, Chanamar, what it means is, that this is David HaMelech or Tehillim making a nevuah. Ilu Chizkiyahu v'siyato neharasim. If the pillars, meaning Chizkiyahu, who was the pillar, was destroyed, tzaddik ma'pa'al. What could tzaddik, in this case, probably meaning God, the righteous one, what could God have done? Meaning the whole thing would have been over. V'chad amar ilu Beit Hamikdash yihares. That shatot is not referring to Chizkiyahu, but it's referring to the Beit Hamikdash, which is the source. And then tzaddik ma'pa'al. Va'ula Amar, Ula said, no. It means the opposite. It means ilu machshavot sha'oto rasha'in nehersaot. It says if they wouldn't have been destroyed, meaning if the shatot were not destroyed, meaning the thoughts of Shevna, tzaddik ma'pa'al, what would have happened? So it says in well, Bishlam alamanda Amar ilu machshavot sha'oto rasha. Right? If you're talking about that, it's referring to the machshavot of Shevna, then I understand why the pasuk continues and says ki hashatot yaharesun, that the pillars will be destroyed because we want the ideas of Shevna to be destroyed. But Ulamanda Beit HaMikdash Nami, right? If you, well, sorry, because Shatot, not the pillars are referring to the Machshavot. Ulamanda Amar Beit HaMikdash, and if you say it's referring to Beit HaMikdash Nami, Ditznan, we actually have a source that the word Shatot refers to the Beit HaMikdash. Ditznan, the Mishnah says, very interesting Mishnah in Yuma, if you remember, Evan Haitashami Moti Yevim Rishonim. There was an Evan and the stone at the source of the Beit HaMikdash that was there from the days of the earliest Nevi'im. Ushtia Haitani, great. It was called the Evan Shtia, right? The Evan, which is the foundation. So you see the word Shatot refers to the Beit HaMikdash. If you think this is referring to Chizkiyahu and his group, where do you find that tzaddikim are called shatot? Says, well, no, there is a pasuk in Shmuel, d'chtiv ki laHashem mitzukei eretz vayashet alehem tevel. It says that Hashem is the mitzukei, the pillars of the earth, and he set vayashet alehem tevel, which is referring to tzaddikim, to righteous people who are placed in front of Hashem. There's another pasuk in Yeshayahu, which is Hifli Eitza Higdil Tushia. That if you have a lot, Hifli means you have wonderful ideas, you'll have a lot of Tushia, which you understand there to mean wisdom and righteous people, right? Scholarly knowledge. Amar Rabbi Chanan, and we're almost done with this Agadata. We are, 10 lines from the bottom of the narrow lines. Lama Nikushma Tushia. Right? Why is it called in this pasuk, this last pasuk we just quoted from Yeshayahu, that Hifli Eitza Tigdil Toshia? Why is Torah called knowledge of Torah called Toshia, that which saves you? But it says Rabbi Chanan, it means because it makes you weak. Because learning, although it's a very good thing, it also takes a lot of your energy and takes a lot of your concentration. If you're sitting there and you're preparing and you're studying all day long, you ultimately get weaker. Davar acher, there's a lot of other explanations in that, but that's the very simple one. Davar acher, some people say that the word toshia is referring to toshia from the word secret, from chashai. Shenitna b'chashai. It's referring to the Torah, which was given in secret, Bnei Satan. That God sort of wanted to hide that he's giving the Torah to the Jewish people because the Satan, remember all the Midrashim, was coming and saying they're not worthy of it. They're going to have bad people in the future. Why are you giving it to them? So that there was an element of secrecy with the Torah. And Davar Acher, there's another explanation that Toshia, the Torah is referred to as Toshia because it's Dvarim Shel Tohu. It's starting off with things that, as we learn in the Torah, are Tohu Vavo, that have really no organization, and they become, through the Torah, organized. Sha'olam mitushat alehem. Ultimately, the world is founded on these words of Tohu that through the Torah become organized and intelligent and beneficial. Amar Ula, says Ula, and it's not so clear why this is here, but we'll read it anyways. It's a fascinating statement, though. Where are we? How many lines from the last? 4 lines from the last narrow line. Said Ula, machshava mo'elet. When you have machshava, Rashi has a couple explanations, but one is that, if you have a lot of planning, right, and you come up with a plan, I'm going to study this on this day, and next week I'm going to finish that, and 3 years from today I'm going to finish that. All your plans are mo'elet. Rashi says mo'elet, they help to ruin it. Afilu dvar Torah. Right? The more you overplan something, you get locked into a mindset that you can't be flexible based on changing circumstances. That'll ruin your ability to accomplish it because you get so fixated on, I have to finish this, I have to do that. And that when reality comes in your way, you don't have the flexibility to make adjustments. So don't be too strict about your planning. There's other explanations, but that's one. Shenemar, where my machshava mo'elet afil divrei Torah, shenemar mefer machshavot arumim, that God sort of will ruin the plans of men, or means of those who are crafty. Those are making ideas. And their hands will not fill toshia. Now we just explained that toshia refers to Torah, so their hands will not be filled with Torah. Amar Rabba says Rabba, but imasukin lishma, if you're doing it for the right purpose, you're not doing it for some other ulterior motive. You want to finish, you want to make a siyum, you want to get you want to get respect. Then enamo elik, then machshava does not ruin your plan. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Mishlei, rabot machshavot v'levish. There might be many thoughts in a person's heart. Atzat Hashem hitakum, but the one that fulfilled is the one that it follows Hashem. Atzah sheyesh b'dvar Hashem, an idea, a plan that has the words of God. Hitakum leolam, that will be forever. So hopefully all of our planning will be atzat Hashem. It will be with, for Hashem's sake, and therefore will persist. Now, that's the end of the Agarita. We're at the first wide line. Back to our Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda in Matai. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah, when is a gambler and all these people puzzle? If they have no other business. But if they have a regular job on the side, then they're okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Lazar, halachik Rabbi Yehuda. That's in fact how we paskin. And says Rabbi Avon, Rabbi Lazar, very important halacha, which has huge implications for today even. Kulan tzrichin hachraza bebeitin. All of these people. Now, again, this is really not clear who are all of these people, right? But let's assume it does not mean all people who are over Isuri Doraita, but the people we talked about in our Mishnah, who are gamblers, shepherds, tax collectors. You don't just assume that all these people are chashud, that they might have stolen, right? But that doesn't mean they necessarily did. So therefore, they all, in order to be puzzle, need to have an announcement in Beit Din that this person has been verified that they are a gambler or they're a shepherd, and they therefore are not kosher for testimony, and you don't use them as your aid. Because otherwise, obviously, you get into very problematic situations where you don't know about someone, you use them, and 10 years later, it turns out that there's someone you can rely on, and your whole, marriage is not effective anyway. So therefore, you have to announce in Beit Din. Now, Roa, each specific case, we're going to have some arguments about. A shepherd, Pligi bar Ravacha v'Ravina. In fact, there was a machlokah between Ravacha and Ravina. Chanamar, one said boy achraza, you have to announce it in order for him to be possible. Chanamar lo boy achraza, and one said you don't. According to the one who says you don't need to announce a shepherd, meaning an automatic pasul for a shepherd to be a witness. This is what we had yesterday at the end of the day. Stamro e pasul. And a stam ro'eh is puzzle, meaning if you know they're a shepherd, they're puzzle for testimony. But elamand amar boyachraza, if we say that you need to announce it, what do you mean stam ro'eh puzzle? Right? Says the Gemara, because dibastama machbizinola. What it means is that if you meet a shepherd, you can assume that court announced that he's not a kosher aid. Right? Now, if they didn't, he is until they announce. So there's a list somewhere. All these people are officially on the blacklist. You can assume they already put him on the list because he's a known shepherd. But if they didn't, he's not going to become puzzle. Now, there was a case, himatana, there was a gift, right? Someone made a very large donation, let's say. Obviously, it's not what matana usually means. One person gave money to another person. The witnesses on this matana were two robbers, right? So, Sava Rav Papa Rashmo Lachshura. Rav Papa Rashmo said, wait a second, that shouldn't be a problem for them to be witnesses, because even though they are gazlanim, halach lizu alayo. No one ever announced in court before now that they're not kosher. So although they're gazlanim, they're allowed to sign until you announce. Amalei Rava said Rava, that's need to be in hachaza b'gazlan d'Rabbanan. That's only true in all the cases in our Mishnah and the cases of the Braita of gazlan d'Rabbanan, where it's asmachta or it's some other thing like that. But gazlan d'Oraita, mi be'inan hachaza. Do you need to announce if it's a gazlan d'Oraita? Meaning, if everybody knows that this person does averot, then they're not trustworthy and they would be puzzle for a testimony, even if you didn't announce it. Continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman, ochlei davar acher psulin le'edut. Fascinating halacha. It sounds a lot like davar acher usually means, pig in our case, right? So if you eat trait, but that's not what it means. So don't take that interpretation. Ochlei davar acher means if you eat something that comes from somebody else. And Rashi explains that, and everyone explains, that it means you eat money of tzedakah given to you by non-Jews. So you basically take charity from Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and you eat their things. They have a big, they have an open day, whatever, for their saint so and so, assuming that's Avodah Zarah, and you participate. Basically, what it shows, it happens to be kosher food. Don't worry, they got you kosher food. But what it shows is that you care much more about money and your physical well-being than about the value of the principle of not participating in Avodah Zarah. So if you're ochlei davar acher, you're pasul le'edut. Of course, it's not an isur doraita by any means. It just shows bad character. Now, that's of course if you do it in public, so people know you're doing it. But if you do it privately, that's not a problem. And furthermore, they only say you can't do it in public if you can get the money in private, but you don't seem to care. You're willing to go and join go to the soup kitchen inside the temple, right? So you could have gotten a package to take home, but you chose to do it in public, right? You are embarrassing yourself, basically, lowering yourself by doing it in public. Aval, lo efshar if you can't get any other way, this is your livelihood. This is what you got to do. So you're not basically showing that you don't care about your personal, respect and understanding. You just have no other way to eat. So therefore, we allow you to take the food from the non-Jews and still be a witness. Amar Rav Nachman, got a few more lines, 3 more minutes. Says Rav Nachman, Hachashud al arayot. This is a fascinating halacha as well. A person who is suspect on sexual prohibitions, right? Not convicted. So this is where Tosa says it's very important. It's chashud. If a person is known that they've done that, they've been over, sleeping with someone they're not allowed to sleep with, then they're presumably puzzled because they're a Russia, right? But let's say someone is just suspected. If you recall, we had a Gemara, we had a couple Gemaras now, but in Kedusha, we had a whole Gemara that if a person is suspected on rayot, we will give them makot, remember, right? Even on the reputation, because they allowed themselves to be put in a place where the people suspect them, which already means, you're not acting completely appropriately. So let's say you're chashur al rayot, you are kashur le'edut, but that doesn't make you possible for edut, because first, there's a lot of possible reasons, but one is that, you might be willing to do things for sexual favors, but it doesn't mean you're going to lie about money, right? They're totally different things. We don't know that you're going to eat food or take money that is inappropriate. Amar Rav Sheshet, said Rav Sheshet, that makes no sense. Ani Mari, answer me. Ani Mari means answer me, my master. It's a challenge, right? Explain this, please. Arba'im b'katve. We're going to hit him 40 on the shoulders. I mean, we're going to give him makot arba'im. The kasher, and he's kosher. We're treated like a Russia. And you say he's allowed to say testimony? So anyways, but that was what Rav Sheshet said. But Rav Nachman did not back down. And we pass like Rav Nachman. That in fact, he's kosher. Amar Rava, now Rava said, but Mode Rav Nachman in edut isha shu pasul. Rav Nachman admits that he's not exactly a person who can say that a woman is divorced, right? Because if he's suspect, he's going to be sleeping with people, right? Then he is not trusted to, change the status of edut isha. Amar Ravina, but that's only Tamer of Papa. That's only about divorce. Amar Fuka, because he might want to have an affair with her. You don't have to worry about him saying someone's married, because that removes the pool of people he can do things with that are inappropriate. It's pshita, it's obvious. Now, you would have thought, the person who's over on Areo, it doesn't matter if a woman's married. In fact, he prefers if she's married because it's better. As we have in Mishlei, Mayim Ginuvim Yim Taku. Stolen waters are sweeter. So you might think he's, such a avaryan, he's so over on this avera, he'd rather a woman be married halachically so that he can sleep with her. Kamashmal, and that's actually not, it's a nice thing to say, but it doesn't make his life easier. Right? The more a woman is not married and not associated with someone else, he has more opportunities to sleep with that woman, and therefore he's only not trusted for breaking up marriages or removing connections, not for making connections. Bam Rav Nachman, another great halacha of Rav Nachman. You can see these are all from Rav Nachman in the last few halachot. Ganav Nisan, Ganav Tishrei lo shmei Ganav. If you just steal sometimes, you're not a Ganav. What does that mean? Right? If you steal in Nisan and you steal in Tishrei, remember Nisan and Tishrei is when they work the fields, right? Those were the big harvest times and planting times. So a person who's a sharecropper who goes into the field and takes a little bit off the top, right? That person is not necessarily someone who steals all the time. He steals from opportunity. He has this opportunity to steal and he rationalizes, I'm working in the field, and if I was a worker, I would get to eat whatever I wanted. I happen to be a sharecropper, so I'm also a partial owner. You actually don't allow to eat if you're a sharecropper. But when a person steals, but they rationalize, we don't worry that they're a person who doesn't care about moral values and doesn't care about money. We understand that they don't care in certain situations, but if we understand the situation, it doesn't passel them from edut, which is a great concept, and you could see something very complex, right? So a person who steals in Nisan and Tishrei, lo shmei ganav, davar muat. It's only if he's a sharecropper, he takes a small amount, davar shnigmara malachto, and it's something that has finished the work, meaning had he been a poel, had he been a worker, he would be allowed to eat it. So he rationalizes, okay, I'm a sharecropper, I can eat it too. But if he just walks into your field and steals your apples, that, of course, is a ganav who we worry about. Now, one story. Ichrei de Rav Zvid, there was a ikar, which is a farmer, a hoer, right, of Rav Zvid. One of them, Ganav Kaba Desari, one stole a kav of barley, upasle, and he made him puzzle for Eidos. V'chad Ganav Kibur Dahini, one stole a kibur, which is a measurement of ahini, of olives, right? Sorry, of dates, not of dates. Upasle, and he puzzled him too, right? And he basically said, so that's arguing with Rav Nachman, it seems, right? Probably. One last case, which is brought lahalacha very importantly, and again lays a lot of thought into how this whole concept works. There were hani kaburai. There were people who were grave diggers. Kaburai means they dug graves, and these people, someone died, and they went out and they dug a grave on the first day of Yom Tov of Shavuot, Vatzeret, right? The cover kaburai, the kibur nafsha, they buried a person Yom Tov Rishon Shal Atzeret, which is an Isser Doraita. They're not allowed to dig, you're not allowed to carry, whatever the Isser is. Most understand it's Isser Doraita. Shamte Rav Papa. Rav Papa said they put them in Cherem, right? These guys, no one can work in their business. They're totally prohibited. Upaslin leidut, and he said there can't be testimony. They can't say testimony. Said the Gemara, but they continued. Achshrei Rafuna brings Rav Yeshua. Rafuna brings Rav Yeshua said they're not possible for edut. Right? What they did is wrong, but that doesn't make them possible for edut. We don't not trust them about anything. Amalei Rav Papa said Rav Papa to Rafuna brings Rav Yeshua. What are you talking about? Harishayim ninu. They are over an Isser Doraita. They're Rishayim. Savri said Rafuna brings Yeshua, a phenomenal answer. They are over an Isser Doraita, but they don't think that. Savri, they think mitzvah ka'avdi. They justify it to themselves. They think, oh, it's Yom Tov, but this person died. They have to be buried quickly. We're doing a favor. We're doing a big mitzvah. And because they thought that, even though they're wrong, that doesn't make them bad people. It makes them, right? It makes them, they get into cherem because you have to know that they're not allowed to do it and you can't work with them. But it doesn't actually make them bad people because they thought what they were doing is right. And says Rav Funa, says Rav Papa, sorry, I actually put them in cherem. Says the Gemara, well, people rationalize incredibly. They say, Savri kapara kavdi the Rabbanan, right? The Rabbanan are making a forgiveness for me, a kapara, meaning I'm not. You're not allowed to do this, but someone's got to do it on Yom Tif. The poor guy has to be buried, so I'm going to be mechalel Yom Tif in order to bury the person. The rabbis come and say, you did something wrong. We're punishing you. Yeah, they're punishing me so that the avera goes away, kind of thing. But basically, in my head, I rationalize that what I'm doing is not wrong, and even though it is, the fact that we believe that that's how you rationalize it means that we don't suspect that you're going to break every halacha, right? You're not going to willy-nilly not be a good aid or not be a good dayan. You just did something that was wrong that you thought was right. And so this is actually brought halacha. It's a fascinating thing that the psul of edut depends on what your intention was and what we assume your value system is, which of course is a very hard thing to assess in a person, right? So that is a great halacha. We will continue some of it tomorrow, but from the last line, Eid Zomim. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you so much.
I have some not as good news as usual, which is that fortunately and unfortunately, I'm going back to Israel on Wednesday, God willing.
Wow.
For a weekend only, just till Sunday for a wedding.
Mazal Tov.
Thank you.
It's for a good reason.
For a very good reason, God willing. But I will probably pre-record the next weekend's stuff.
Okay. All right.
I'll have time, but hopefully it's for a good reason, and then God willing, I'll be back the following week.
Okay.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.